Do you recognize these? I'd be surprised if you didn't. Tomato pincushions have been the standard for decades. When I shared my spool pet find the other day, so many of the comments that came in had to do with memories of things that your grandparents had. And I loved reading them all because I have such good memories associated with my own grandparents. Since my connection with sewing and creation began with my Grammy, my memories of her are so closely entwined with what I do. So I wanted to share my favorite things that I have from her that I still use every day. When my Grammy passed, my family said I could take anything I wanted from her sewing room. But this is the thing I had the biggest connection with. My earliest memories of sitting by her machine and, quote, helping her sew are of being in charge of the pincushion because I couldn't be trusted to do much else at age 4 or 5. So I was the overseer of pin replacement and sharpening, which I insisted had to be performed after every use of a pin, no matter how much she told me that it wasn't necessary. I now have 2 of her tomato pincushions. This one still has her pins in it, and I use the pins every day when I make stuff for you all. So this all got me thinking about the history of pincushions and why the tomato is such a prevalent shape. Turns out the tomato pincushion was probably introduced in the Victorian era. Although pincushions had been around, this is when they really flourished as a keepsake and a collector's item. There were lots of different ones, and they range from practical to sentimental to whimsical. But it's hard to find any cut and dry evidence of when the tomato took over. So why did the tomato win out? Well, almost everything I read about the history of this alludes to a Victorian tradition of putting a tomato on your mantle to ward off evil spirits and bring prosperity. The story says that when tomatoes were out of season, people started making fabric tomatoes so they could still put them on their mantle, and eventually they turned into pincushions. But as much as we love a cute little legend, there's just no evidence that this is true. In fact, the only examples I found of a tomato on the mantle were in conjunction with this pincushion story, and there's no other historical example of Victorians putting tomatoes out on the mantle. Although they were originally grown in Europe as a decorative plant, so they do have a history of being associated with decor. But there are also other examples of fruit and vegetables being used as pincushion shapes. And as cute as they all are, I think we just have to admit that tomato won out because it's just the most practical shape. It has a wide and flat enough base, it's plumpy enough to fit all your pins, and it's still instantly recognizable as being a tomato. It's easy to make, and it just works best, and that's probably why it was the one that began to be mass-produced. Also, it could have gained a lot of popularity as a novelty because tomatoes were relatively new as a food for Europeans and non-Native Americans in the 19th century, as it had finally been widely proven that they were not poisonous. But that's kind of a whole other story. Now, thanks to my dog, I can confirm that this older version is filled with wood shavings, and this part is filled with emery shavings, like a nail file, to sharpen and clean off your pins. And now because I work with a lot of fusible interfacing and things like that, my pins and needles can get gunky, and I can attest that a few pokes to the strawberry really does help. Wait, strawberry? Yeah, that's not a pepper or a mini tomato, it is a strawberry. And they probably decided on a strawberry for the same reasons as the tomato. The shape just works. Now it's your turn to tell me about all of your pincushions, tomato and otherwise.